My wife faked her death to escape our marriage. 2 years later, I found her selling our wedding ring on Facebook. When I confronted her, she said I deserved to suffer. 2 years after burying an empty casket, I discovered my wife was alive and living 3 hours away under a new name. When I confronted her with evidence, she claimed I was the reason she had to die. By the time I was finished, she wished she'd stayed dead. Lisa and I had been married for 8 years when she announced she wanted to hike the Cascade Trail alone for our anniversary. It was unusual. We'd always done anniversary hikes together, but we'd been fighting more lately about starting a family, and I figured she needed space to think. "I just need to clear my head," she said, packing her familiar blue backpack. "You understand, right?" I didn't, but I nodded anyway. Our marriage had felt strained for months, and I hoped the solo trip would help her find whatever peace she was looking for. She left on a Friday morning with plans to return Sunday evening. The trail was a moderate 3-day loop she'd hiked before, well-marked and popular with experienced hikers. When Sunday night came and went without word, I started calling. Her phone went straight to voicemail. By Monday morning, I was at the ranger station filing a missing person report. The search and rescue operation lasted 5 days. They found her backpack wedged between rocks near Widow's Falls, a dangerous section where the trail curved around a steep cliff. Her phone was inside, cracked but still functional. Her wallet contained all her identification and credit cards. The weather had been terrible that weekend, heavy rain and strong winds that made the rocks treacherous. The search team concluded she'd slipped and fallen into the rapids below. The current was too strong and the terrain too dangerous for body recovery. "I'm sorry," the lead searcher told me. "The water moves fast through there. If she went over, we'll likely never find her." Lisa's parents arranged the funeral for the following week. Closed casket, obviously, since there was no body to bury. I sat in the front pew staring at a photo of Lisa on our wedding day, trying to understand how my wife had simply vanished from the world. The grief nearly destroyed me. I took leave from my engineering job and barely left the house for months. Friends and family rotated through, bringing casseroles and checking that I was still breathing. Lisa's sister, Emma, stayed with me for 2 weeks, helping sort through Lisa's belongings. "She would want you to keep living," Emma said as we packed Lisa's clothes for donation. "She loved you so much." I kept only a few things: her grandmother's ring, a photo album from our honeymoon, and the camping gear we'd accumulated over years of hiking together. Everything else went to charity or family members. A year passed, then another. I was finally starting to date again when something impossible happened. I was browsing Facebook Marketplace for camping equipment, planning a solo backpacking trip to mark the 2nd anniversary of Lisa's death. I decided to hike the same trail where she disappeared, maybe find some closure. That's when I saw the listing: vintage camping gear for sale, moving overseas. The seller's profile photo showed a woman with short dark hair and sunglasses. Something about her posture looked familiar, but it was the camping gear that made my heart stop. Listed among the items was Lisa's blue backpack. The same model, same color, same distinctive patches she'd sewn on during our Colorado trip 3 years earlier. One patch was slightly torn. I remembered her catching it on a branch. But that wasn't the worst part. Also listed was her grandmother's engagement ring. The antique setting was unmistakable, with a tiny chip in one of the side stones that we'd never bothered to repair. I took screenshots of everything before the listing could disappear. Then I clicked on the seller's profile. The woman called herself Ana Martinez and listed her location as Riverside, about 3 hours from our hometown. Her profile was sparse, only a few photos, all recent, showing the back of a woman with dramatically different hair. But in one photo, she was wearing Lisa's watch, the vintage Timex her father had given her for college graduation. I'd helped her put in a new battery just weeks before she'd left for that final hike. My hands shook as I created a fake Facebook account to message her. I asked about the camping gear, saying I was interested in buying the whole lot for a family trip. She responded within minutes, eager to sell. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop in Riverside the following Saturday. I spent the week in a haze, convinced I was losing my mind. Lisa was dead. I'd attended her funeral, spoken at her memorial service, visited her grave dozens of times. But that ring, that backpack, that watch, they were definitely hers. I hired a private investigator, needing professional confirmation that I wasn't completely insane. Within 48 hours, he'd confirmed that Ana Martinez was a legal identity created 18 months earlier. The social security number was legitimate, the address was real, and she had a clean credit history going back exactly 18 months. Before that date, Ana Martinez had never existed. Saturday arrived. I parked across from the coffee shop early, watching through the window as Anna walked in. Even with the shorter hair and different clothes, I knew immediately. It was Lisa. My wife, my supposedly dead wife, was ordering a latte and checking her phone like any other living person on a Saturday morning. I sat in my car for 20 minutes trying to process what I was seeing. Lisa was alive. She'd been alive this whole time. While I grieved, while her family mourned, while friends sent sympathy cards, she'd been living 3 hours away under a false name. I finally worked up the courage to go inside. She was sitting at a corner table, the blue backpack open beside her with gear spread out for display. She looked up as I approached, and I watched her face cycle through confusion, recognition, and terror in the span of 3 seconds. "Hi, Lisa," I said quietly, sitting down across from her. She went pale but didn't run. Instead, she glanced around the coffee shop, calculating her options. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said finally. "My name is Anna. I pulled out my phone and showed her the screenshots I'd taken of her listing. That's your grandmother's ring, the one you inherited when she died. I was there when you got it appraised for insurance. Her jaw tightened. You're mistaken. The watch, too. Your dad gave it to you for graduation. I helped you replace the battery 2 years ago, right before you disappeared. She started packing the gear back into the backpack, moving quickly. I need to go. Why, Lisa? Why would you do this? Do you have any idea what you put me through? What you put your family through? She stopped packing and looked at me with something that might have been pity. Because I had to get away from you, David. You were suffocating me. You wouldn't listen when I tried to talk about feeling trapped. This was the only way. The words hit like physical blows. So you faked your death? You let everyone believe you were dead rather than just ask for a divorce? You would have fought it. You would have made it messy and public and impossible. This way was cleaner. Cleaner. She'd put our families through hell, destroyed a piece of my soul, and called it cleaner than filing paperwork. I need to know everything, I said. How you did it, who helped you, what you've been doing for 2 years. And if you try to run or disappear again, I'll make sure the whole world knows you're alive. She looked around the coffee shop again, then sighed. Not here. Too public. There's a park down the street. We can talk there. I followed her car to Riverside Park, my mind racing with questions. At the park, we sat at a picnic table far from other visitors. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Tell me everything, I said. The story came out slowly, reluctantly. Lisa had been planning her escape for over a year. She'd saved money from her part-time job, researching how to create a new identity, practicing her new signature and backstory. The hiking trip was carefully planned. She'd scouted the location weeks earlier, finding the perfect spot near Widow's Falls where she could stage her disappearance. She'd brought a second set of clothes in a waterproof bag, hidden at a predetermined location off the trail. On the day she died, she'd hiked to Widow's Falls, placed her backpack and phone at the edge, then doubled back through dense forest to retrieve her hidden supplies. She'd changed clothes, altered her appearance with a pre-cut wig, and hiked out through a different trail that connected to a Forest Service road. A Confederate, someone she refused to name, had been waiting with a car to drive her to a new city, where she'd already arranged temporary housing under her assumed identity. The social security number, I asked? Bought it. There are people who specialize in creating clean identities for women escaping domestic violence. It's not cheap, but it's thorough. I never hit you. I never threatened you. I never prevented you from leaving. Emotional abuse isn't always physical, David. You were controlling in subtle ways. You made decisions for both of us, dismissed my opinions, made me feel small. I stared at her, trying to reconcile this version of our marriage with my memories. Had I been controlling, dismissive? The accusations felt like looking at our relationship through a funhouse mirror, recognizable but distorted. Even if that's true, I said, there are legal ways to leave a marriage. Divorce lawyers, mediators, counselors. You didn't have to fake your death. You would have fought me on everything. The house, the savings, custody if we'd had kids. This way was simpler. Simpler, that word again. As if the devastation she'd caused was just an inconvenience to be minimized. What about your family? Your parents have been destroyed by grief. Your sister cries every time she mentions you. For the first time, Lisa looked uncomfortable. That wasn't supposed to happen. I thought they'd move on faster. Move on from losing their daughter? Lisa, your mom has been seeing a therapist. Your dad can barely mention your name without breaking down. They visit your grave every week. There is no grave, just an empty box. The casual way she said it made my stomach turn. There's a headstone with your name on it. Your family bought a plot in the cemetery where your grandparents are buried. They spend their weekends tending flowers around an empty hole in the ground. She shifted uncomfortably but didn't respond. I need to know who helped you, I said. This wasn't a one-person operation. I'm not giving you names. Then I'm calling the police right now. I started dialing 911. Wait, she grabbed my wrist. Fine. My cousin Jake helped with the logistics. He picked me up at the Forest Service road and drove me to Sacramento, but he doesn't know about the identity documents. He thought I was just running away from a bad marriage. Anyone else? A woman named Patricia, who specializes in helping abuse victims disappear. She arranged the new identity and taught me how to establish a paper trail. For a fee, $15,000, money I'd been saving for over a year. I thought about the joint savings account that had been frozen after her death, the life insurance policy that was still in probate, the financial chaos her disappearance had created. She'd planned her escape down to the dollar while leaving me to deal with the aftermath. What have you been doing for 2 years? Working. I'm a bookkeeper for a small accounting firm. I live in a studio apartment and keep to myself. It's peaceful. Peaceful. While I'd been in therapy, while her parents had been planning memorial services, while her sister had been naming her daughter after her supposedly dead aunt, Lisa had been living peacefully under an assumed name. The camping gear, I said. Why are you selling it? I'm moving to Portland, starting over again. The Anna Martinez identity is getting too established, too comfortable. I need to disappear before someone recognizes me. She was planning to disappear again, to discard Anna Martinez the way she discarded Lisa Thompson, leaving no trace of either identity behind. You can't keep running forever, I said. Watch me. That's when I made my decision. Lisa thought she could continue gaming the system, creating new identities whenever her current life became inconvenient. She'd caused immeasurable pain to people who loved her and felt no genuine remorse. It was time for consequences. I'm going to give you a choice, I said. You can come with me to the police station right now and confess everything. Tell them how you faked your death, who helped you, and where you've been, or I can turn this recording over to the FBI and let them hunt you down. You're bluffing. I pulled out my phone and showed her the active recording. 43 minutes of her confessing to identity fraud, document forgery, and conspiracy. Try me. She stared at the phone, realizing for the first time that I'd been documenting everything. Delete that. Not happening. You have 10 seconds to decide. Lisa had spent 2 years thinking she was smarter than everyone else, that her careful planning had made her untouchable. She was about to learn that some choices can't be undone, no matter how far you run. The police station was 20 minutes away. During the drive, Lisa called someone, probably her cousin Jake, and spoke in urgent whispers. She was trying to warn her accomplices, but it was too late. I'd already forwarded copies of the recording to multiple email accounts. At the station, I requested to speak with a detective about a missing person case that needed to be reopened. The desk sergeant looked confused when I explained that my dead wife was sitting in the lobby, very much alive. Detective Rodriguez had handled Lisa's original disappearance. He recognized her immediately, despite the changed appearance. Mrs. Thompson, we declared you dead 2 years ago. My name is Anna Martinez now, Lisa said quietly. No, ma'am, your name is Lisa Thompson, and you're under arrest for filing a false missing person report and document fraud. The confession process took 6 hours. Lisa's initial strategy was to minimize her actions, claiming she'd only intended to disappear temporarily until she could get her head together. But the evidence contradicted her story at every turn. The recording I'd made at the park proved premeditation. The identity documents showed extensive fraud. The financial records revealed she'd been systematically draining our joint accounts before her disappearance. Most damaging was the life insurance investigation. Lisa had increased her policy 6 months before disappearing, raising the payout from $50,000 to $300,000. She'd named her parents as beneficiaries, knowing they'd eventually collect when she was declared legally dead. She was planning to fake her death and profit from it, Detective Rodriguez explained to me later. This wasn't a spontaneous decision to escape a bad marriage. This was calculated insurance fraud. The investigation expanded quickly. Jake, the cousin who'd helped with her escape, was arrested for conspiracy and accessory charges. Patricia, the woman who'd created Lisa's false identity, was already under federal investigation for running a large-scale document forgery operation. Lisa's parents were devastated when they learned the truth. Her father called me from the police station, sobbing apologies for the grief they'd unknowingly put me through. Her mother was hospitalized for severe anxiety after learning her daughter had been alive while they'd been planning memorial services. She let us bury an empty casket, her mother whispered when I visited her at the hospital. She watched us grieve and said nothing. Emma, Lisa's sister, was the angriest of all. She'd named her newborn daughter after Lisa, honoring her supposedly dead sister's memory. Learning that Lisa had been alive and indifferent to their pain broke something fundamental in their relationship. I held my baby at Lisa's grave and promised her she'd know about her amazing aunt, Emma said through tears. How do I explain to my daughter that her namesake is a sociopath? The media picked up the story within days. Woman fakes death to escape marriage made national headlines. Lisa's booking photo appeared on news websites alongside stories about the elaborate fraud she'd orchestrated. The public reaction was swift and brutal. Comment sections filled with people expressing outrage at her callousness, her willingness to put family through needless grief, her complete lack of remorse during the confession. Lisa hired a defense attorney who tried to paint her as a victim of psychological abuse, who'd felt she had no other options. They argued that her actions, while misguided, were those of a desperate woman seeking freedom from an oppressive marriage. The strategy fell apart when investigators found Lisa's journal from the months before her disappearance. Instead of documenting abuse or fear, it detailed her excitement about starting a new life, her pride in outsmarting everyone, and her calculations about insurance payouts. One entry, dated 3 weeks before she disappeared, read, "David is so trusting. He actually believes I love him. This is going to be easier than I thought. By Christmas, I'll be free and rich." The prosecution used the journal to establish that Lisa wasn't escaping abuse. She was abandoning a marriage she'd grown tired of while committing fraud in the process. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I testified about our marriage, acknowledging the problems we'd had while disputing Lisa's claims of abuse. Character witnesses described her as manipulative and self-centered, someone who'd always taken the easy way out when life became challenging. Lisa's defense team tried to discredit the journal, claiming it had been fabricated or taken out of context. But handwriting analysis confirmed its authenticity, and the entries matched perfectly with her actions and timeline. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before finding Lisa guilty on all counts: fraud, conspiracy, filing false police reports, and identity theft. The judge sentenced her to 8 years in federal prison, noting that her complete lack of remorse made rehabilitation unlikely. "You caused immeasurable pain to people who loved you," the judge said during sentencing. "You exploited their grief for personal gain and showed no regard for the consequences of your actions. The court finds your behavior sociopathic, and your sentence reflects the severity of your crimes." Lisa showed no emotion during sentencing. She'd maintained her innocence throughout the trial, claiming she was being persecuted for leaving an unhappy marriage. Even facing 8 years in prison, she couldn't acknowledge the devastation she'd caused. The restitution hearing addressed the financial damage Lisa had inflicted. Her parents had to repay the life insurance company, though the policy had never actually been paid out. Jake lost his job and savings to legal fees. Patricia's document forgery ring was dismantled, with dozens of fake identities traced back to her operation. I received a formal apology from the insurance company for the stress of their investigation, though they noted that Lisa's fraud attempt had been sophisticated enough to initially fool their review process. The aftermath was complicated. Lisa's parents struggled with shame and guilt, wondering how they'd missed the signs of their daughter's sociopathy. Emma changed her daughter's name, unable to honor someone who'd caused such pain. I found myself in an odd position, vindicated but not victorious. Learning that my marriage had been built on lies was almost as painful as thinking Lisa was dead. At least when I'd believed she'd died, I could remember our good times without questioning her motives. Now I knew that Lisa had been planning her escape for over a year, that every kiss and conversation during that time had been a performance. She'd been calculating insurance payouts while pretending to love me. The media attention was overwhelming. Reporters called constantly, wanting interviews about life with a sociopath, how it felt to discover my dead wife was alive, whether I'd suspected her capacity for such deception. I gave one interview to a local newspaper, hoping to discourage others. If someone you love starts making dramatic changes, new insurance policies, secret savings accounts, unexplained absences, pay attention, I said. Trust your instincts, and remember that some people are capable of cruelty you can't imagine. Lisa's case became a cautionary tale about insurance fraud and the dangers of assuming missing persons are dead without recovering a body. Search and rescue protocols were updated to include more thorough investigations when circumstances seemed suspicious. The Cascade Trail where Lisa had staged her disappearance was temporarily closed while investigators searched for additional evidence. They found the hidden cache where she'd stored supplies, confirming details from her confession. I eventually sold our house, unable to live with memories that had been poisoned by learning the truth. Lisa had planned her escape while we'd shared that bed, eaten breakfast at that table, pretended to build a future together. 2 years after the trial, I married Sarah, a social worker who specialized in helping fraud victims rebuild their lives. She understood the unique trauma of discovering that someone you'd loved was capable of systematic deception. Lisa remained in federal prison, serving her sentence without the possibility of early parole. Her appeals were denied, and she'd made no attempt to contact me or her family. She existed in a legal limbo, officially alive but dead to everyone who'd once cared about her. Sometimes I wondered if she regretted her choices, if prison had given her time to reflect on the damage she'd caused. But everything I knew about Lisa suggested she blamed others for her consequences, unable to accept responsibility for her actions. The empty grave her parents had bought remained in the cemetery, though they'd removed the headstone. They couldn't bear to see her name associated with the lie she'd forced them to live. The plot sat unmarked, a reminder of the grief that had been manufactured for someone who hadn't deserved it. On what would have been our 10th wedding anniversary, I hiked the Cascade Trail for the first time since Lisa's arrest. The section near Widow's Falls had been restored, with new safety railings and warning signs about the dangerous terrain. I stood at the spot where Lisa had placed her backpack, trying to imagine the calculations she'd made that day. How cold-blooded did someone have to be to stage their own death while their spouse waited at home, trusting and concerned? But I also felt something I hadn't expected: relief. For 2 years, I'd blamed myself for not being a better husband, wondering if I could have prevented Lisa's death by being more attentive, more understanding. Learning that she'd been planning her escape regardless was liberating. I hadn't failed as a husband. I'd simply married someone incapable of genuine love or empathy. The trail was beautiful that day, full of other hikers enjoying the wilderness Lisa had used as a stage for her deception. Life had moved on, as it always does, leaving her lies behind like debris from a storm that had passed. I completed the 3-day loop Lisa had pretended to hike, camping at the same sites, following the same path, but this time, I was hiking towards something instead of away from it, a future built on truth instead of lies, with someone who valued honesty over convenience. The last entry in my trail journal read, "Some people disappear to escape their problems. Others disappear because they are the problem. The difference matters." Lisa had thought she was smart enough to vanish without consequences, to reinvent herself as often as necessary to avoid accountability. She'd learned too late that some actions can't be undone, no matter how far you run or how many identities you assume. The truth had found her in a coffee shop in Riverside, and it had followed her to a federal prison cell where she'd remain for the next several years. She'd traded 8 years of marriage for 8 years of incarceration, and somehow convinced herself she'd gotten the better deal. I disagreed. Freedom isn't the absence of commitment. It's the courage to honor the commitments you make, even when they become difficult. Lisa had never understood that distinction, and it had cost her everything. But it had taught me something valuable. Love isn't just about feeling strongly for someone. It's about seeing them clearly and choosing them anyway. I'd loved an illusion, while Lisa had been incapable of loving anyone but herself. Now I was married to someone real, someone whose love didn't require deception to sustain itself. We hiked together, planned together, argued and reconciled like normal couples who trusted each other enough to be honest. honest. That was the gift Lisa had given me, accidentally and against her intentions. The ability to recognize authentic love when I found it. Her lies had taught me the value of truth. Her betrayal had shown me the importance of loyalty, and her selfishness had helped me appreciate genuine care. She'd intended to disappear without consequences, leaving me to grieve while she started fresh somewhere else. Instead, she'd made herself disappear from everything that mattered: family, freedom, and the possibility of redemption. But the story doesn't end there. 5 years after Lisa's conviction, something happened that made everything even more twisted. I was at work when Detective Rodriguez called. He'd retired, but was consulting on a cold case that connected to Lisa's situation. "David, we need to talk," he said. "We've uncovered something about Lisa's case that changes everything." I met him at a coffee shop downtown, the same chain where I'd first confronted Lisa years earlier. The irony wasn't lost on me. Lisa wasn't working alone, Detective Rodriguez said without preamble. She was part of a much larger operation. He showed me a file thick with documents and photographs. Lisa's case had been connected to a nationwide network that specialized in helping people fake their deaths for various reasons: escaping debts, avoiding prosecution, collecting insurance money. Patricia, the woman who created Lisa's identity, was running one of the largest fake death operations in U.S. history, he explained. "We've identified over 200 cases spanning 15 years. My stomach dropped. 200 people, 200 fake deaths. Some for insurance fraud, some to escape domestic violence, some to avoid criminal charges. But Lisa's case was special." He pulled out a photograph that made my blood run cold. It showed Lisa at what appeared to be a training session, sitting around a table with a dozen other people, all taking notes. "This was taken 6 months before her disappearance," Rodriguez continued. "Lisa wasn't just a client. She was being trained to help recruit other victims." The photograph showed Lisa smiling, engaged, clearly comfortable in the setting. She wasn't a desperate woman seeking escape. She was an active participant in a criminal enterprise. "We found her recruitment list," Rodriguez said, sliding another document across the table. She'd identified 12 potential targets, people in troubled marriages with valuable insurance policies. I stared at the names on the list. Some I recognized: mutual friends, people from our neighborhood, even my coworker's wife who'd been having marital problems. She was going to help them fake their deaths too, for a fee. Lisa was developing her own satellite operation under Patricia's umbrella. Your marriage was just her practice run. The revelation recontextualized everything. Lisa hadn't faked her death to escape me. She'd used our marriage as a testing ground for a business model. I'd been an unwitting participant in her criminal apprenticeship. "How did you discover this?" One of her recruits came forward, a woman named Michelle whose husband had been pressuring her to disappear with him. Michelle got suspicious and contacted us instead. Rodriguez showed me transcripts of recorded conversations between Lisa and Michelle. Even while in prison, Lisa had been coordinating criminal activities through coded letters and phone calls. She's been running operations from federal prison. Prison communication is easier to monitor than most people think, but criminals adapt. Lisa was using book clubs, religious correspondence, even legal mail to coordinate activities. I felt sick. Not only had Lisa destroyed my life as practice for a criminal career, but she'd continued her operations even after conviction. Prison hadn't reformed her. It had simply forced her to be more creative. What happens now? Federal prosecutors are preparing additional charges: racketeering, conspiracy, mail fraud, wire fraud. Lisa is looking at potentially decades more in prison. The investigation had uncovered evidence that Lisa's network had been responsible for insurance fraud totaling over $50 million. They'd helped criminals escape justice, facilitated money laundering, and even assisted in at least 3 murders disguised as accidental deaths. The murders? Spouses who got suspicious about their partner's plans to disappear. The network had enforcers who made sure loose ends were tied up permanently. Rodriguez showed me surveillance photos of Lisa meeting with known criminals, financial records showing payments for violent services, and transcripts of conversations discussing permanent solutions to problematic spouses. Was I ever in danger? Hard to say. Your cooperation with law enforcement probably saved your life. If you'd tried to help Lisa or cover for her, you might have become a liability. The scope of Lisa's criminal activities was staggering. She hadn't been a desperate wife seeking freedom. She'd been a calculating predator who'd used our marriage to develop skills for a criminal enterprise. Over the following months, more details emerged about the network's operations. They'd had connections in police departments, coroner's offices, insurance companies, and federal agencies. The corruption reached into every system designed to prevent exactly this type of fraud. Lisa's role had been specifically targeting middle-class couples with assets worth stealing. She'd developed psychological profiles for ideal victims and techniques for manipulating them into participating in their own destruction. The trial for the racketeering charges lasted 6 months. Evidence included thousands of documents, hundreds of hours of recorded conversations, and testimony from dozens of victims and co-conspirators. I testified again, this time about the psychological manipulation Lisa had used during our marriage. Federal prosecutors wanted to establish her pattern of grooming victims for exploitation. She spent months testing my reactions to stress, my willingness to trust her, my capacity for denial, I told the court. Our marriage wasn't a relationship, it was research for her criminal career. Lisa's defense team tried arguing that she'd been coerced into joining the network, that Patricia had manipulated her into participating. But the evidence showed Lisa had actively sought out the organization and volunteered to expand their operations. The most damaging testimony came from Michelle, the woman Lisa had tried to recruit while in prison. She'd recorded dozens of conversations where Lisa detailed her techniques for manipulating spouses and families. She told me that husbands were the easiest targets, Michelle testified. She said men wanted to believe their wives loved them, so they'd ignore obvious signs of deception. Lisa had developed a manual for spousal manipulation that the network used to train other operatives. The document contained psychological profiles, manipulation techniques, and step-by-step instructions for staging believable disappearances. The manual included case studies based on our marriage. My reactions to Lisa's behavior had been documented and analyzed to improve future operations. Every argument we'd had, every moment of doubt I'd expressed, every instance of my trusting her despite red flags, it had all been recorded and studied. Subject exhibited typical pattern of denial and rationalization, one entry read. Continued to believe in spouse's love despite obvious signs of preparation for departure. Useful template for future targeting. Reading those clinical observations about my own psychological vulnerabilities was devastating. Lisa hadn't just betrayed me, she'd turned me into a case study for how to destroy other people's lives. The prosecution presented evidence of at least 30 successful fake deaths orchestrated by Lisa's network. Families across the country had been devastated by spouses who'd disappeared, leaving behind fabricated evidence of accidental deaths or suicides. Each case followed the same pattern Lisa had used with me: months of psychological preparation, careful documentation of the victim's emotional state, staged disappearances in remote locations, and elaborate cover stories involving weather or dangerous terrain. The financial damage was staggering. Insurance companies had paid out over $50 million in fraudulent death claims. Families had been left bankrupt after losing breadwinners who'd actually fled with their assets. But the emotional damage was incalculable. Children had grown up believing their parents were dead. Grandparents had died grieving for children who were actually living under false identities. Entire family structures had been destroyed based on carefully orchestrated lies. Lisa's conviction on racketeering charges added 30 years to her sentence. She would now serve at least 38 years in federal prison, meaning she wouldn't be eligible for release until she was in her 70s. The judge was unforgiving during sentencing. You have demonstrated a complete lack of human empathy and a systematic disregard for the devastating consequences of your actions. Your crimes represent a betrayal of the most fundamental bonds of trust in our society. Lisa showed no emotion during the extended sentencing. She'd maintained her innocence throughout the trial, claiming she'd been framed by the network's leadership to protect more valuable operatives. But evidence of her enthusiastic participation was overwhelming. Recorded conversations showed her laughing about victims' emotional breakdowns, celebrating successful fraud operations, and planning expansion into new territories. The network's dismantling led to a federal task force focused on fake death fraud. New protocols were established for verifying deaths, especially in cases involving valuable insurance policies or suspicious circumstances. Law enforcement agencies across the country received training based on Lisa's case. Her techniques had been so sophisticated that investigators needed specialized knowledge to recognize similar operations. I was invited to speak at conferences about surviving sophisticated psychological manipulation. My experience helped train mental health professionals, law enforcement officers, and insurance investigators. The person you love most can become your greatest enemy without you realizing it, I would tell audiences. Trust your instincts, document suspicious behavior, and remember that love shouldn't require you to ignore obvious red flags. Sarah supported my decision to become an advocate for fraud victims. She understood that helping others heal from similar betrayals was part of my own recovery process. We had 2 children by this point, Hope, now 7, and Michael, age 4. Raising them with complete honesty felt revolutionary after years of being systematically deceived. When Hope asked about my first marriage, I explained that some people hurt others for money, and that's why we always tell the truth in our family. She seemed to understand that lies could be dangerous weapons. Will the bad lady ever come back? Hope asked. No, I told her honestly. She's in prison where she can't hurt anyone anymore. The financial restitution from Lisa's crimes helped fund our children's education and our family's security. The insurance companies had recovered most of their losses through asset forfeiture from network members. But money couldn't repair the psychological damage to the hundreds of families who'd been victimized. Support groups formed across the country for people who'd discovered their dead spouses were actually living under false identities. The trauma was unique and devastating. Unlike other forms of betrayal, fake death involved grieving someone who was actually alive and indifferent to your pain. It required rebuilding your understanding of reality while processing layers of deception. Emma, Lisa's sister, eventually reconnected with me after years of therapy. She'd struggled with guilt over not recognizing her sister's sociopathic behavior, but had learned that manipulation victims shouldn't blame themselves. Lisa fooled everyone, Emma said during one of our conversations. situations, even our parents, who knew her better than anyone. Her ability to deceive people was pathological. Emma had changed her daughter's name and moved across the country, but the shame of being related to someone so notorious had followed her everywhere. She'd considered changing her own last name to escape the association. "I keep wondering if I have any of her traits," Emma confided. "What if sociopathy runs in families? What if I'm capable of hurting people the way she did?" I assured her that recognizing the possibility of harmful behavior was exactly what prevented it. Lisa's problem wasn't inherited genetics. It was her complete inability to empathize with other people's pain. The documentary about Lisa's case won several awards and sparked international discussion about sophisticated fraud operations. Countries around the world reported discovering similar networks operating within their borders. Lisa became a case study in criminal psychology programs, representing a rare example of someone who'd weaponized intimate relationships for financial gain. Her techniques were studied to help identify and prevent similar predators. But the most important outcome was the protection of future victims. The network's exposure had prevented hundreds of planned fake deaths and saved countless families from devastating betrayals. 10 years after Lisa's original conviction, I received a letter from the federal prison where she was serving her extended sentence. It was from a new chaplain who'd been assigned to work with long-term inmates. The chaplain explained that Lisa had been asking to send letters to her victims as part of a restorative justice program. She claimed to have found genuine faith and wanted to make amends for her crimes. I called the prison immediately to clarify that I didn't consent to any contact from Lisa, regardless of her claimed spiritual transformation. The chaplain seemed surprised by my adamant refusal. "She speaks very convincingly about her remorse," he said. "She's been attending religious services regularly and helping other inmates with their emotional healing. She's manipulating you the same way she manipulated everyone else," I explained. "Lisa is incapable of genuine remorse. Any religious conversion is just her latest performance designed to get what she wants." I provided the chaplain with documentation about Lisa's psychological profile and her history of using institutional programs to facilitate continued criminal activity. He thanked me for the information and assured me that no contact would be permitted. 2 weeks later, another prison official called to inform me that Lisa had been caught running a commissary fraud scheme using the religious program as cover. She'd been manipulating new inmates and exploiting the chaplain's trust to access restricted areas of the prison. Lisa was moved to administrative segregation, effectively solitary confinement, for the remainder of her sentence. Her ability to manipulate other inmates and staff members had made her too dangerous for general population. Even after decades in prison, facing the rest of her life behind bars, Lisa continued trying to run cons and hurt people. Prison hadn't reformed her. It had simply provided a new environment for her predatory behavior. Sarah and I celebrated our 10th wedding anniversary with a family trip to Europe. Our children were old enough to appreciate the travel, and we spent 2 weeks exploring countries neither of us had ever seen. On the flight home, I reflected on how different my life had become since Lisa's betrayal. Her attempt to destroy me had ultimately led to a family built on truth, trust, and genuine love. Hope and Michael fought over window seats and trading cards, displaying the normal sibling dynamics of children who'd never doubted their parents' love or honesty. They were growing up secure in ways I'd never experienced in my first marriage. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if Lisa had just asked for a divorce?" Sarah asked during a quiet moment while the children slept. "She would have found another victim," I answered. "Lisa didn't fake her death to escape me. She used me to practice for a criminal career. If she'd divorced me normally, she would have just moved on to the next target." Sarah nodded, understanding that Lisa's betrayal hadn't been personal. It had been professional. I'd been selected as a suitable victim based on psychological profiles and financial assets, not because of any specific problems in our relationship. That realization had been both devastating and liberating. Devastating because it meant our entire marriage had been a lie from the beginning. Liberating because it removed any responsibility I might have felt for Lisa's choices. 15 years after Lisa's original disappearance, I was contacted by a true crime podcast wanting to feature her case. They'd researched the story extensively and wanted to interview me about the psychological impact of discovering your spouse had faked their death. I agreed to participate, hoping to reach people who might be experiencing similar situations. The podcast episode was downloaded over 2 million times and generated hundreds of messages from listeners who'd recognized manipulation patterns in their own relationships. Many had contacted law enforcement based on suspicions raised by hearing Lisa's story. Several ongoing fraud investigations had been launched after people reported suspicious behavior by spouses or family members. "Your story saved my life," one woman wrote. "My husband had been pressuring me to increase my life insurance and had been researching remote hiking trails. After hearing your podcast, I realized he might be planning something terrible." The woman had contacted police, who discovered her husband was indeed planning to fake her death for insurance money. He was arrested before he could carry out his plan, and she'd escaped a situation that could have ended with her actual murder. Stories like that made all the painful publicity worthwhile. If sharing my experience prevented even one person from being victimized by a predator like Lisa, then the trauma had served a purpose. Lisa remained in federal prison, now in her 50s, serving what was effectively a life sentence. sentence. She'd exhausted all appeals and had no realistic hope of ever being released. Her criminal empire had been completely dismantled, her assets forfeited, her reputation destroyed. But most importantly, she could never hurt anyone again. The woman who'd weaponized love and trust had been permanently removed from society, unable to manipulate or deceive new victims. Sometimes justice isn't about revenge, it's about protection. Lisa's imprisonment protected countless potential victims from someone who viewed other people as resources to be exploited, rather than human beings deserving of love and respect. I kept one photograph from our marriage, not out of nostalgia, but as a reminder. It showed Lisa and me on our wedding day, both smiling at the camera. To anyone looking at that photo, we appeared to be a happy couple starting their life together. But knowing what I knew now, I could see things I'd missed at the time. Lisa's smile was perfect, but didn't reach her eyes. Her posture was slightly angled away from me. Even on our wedding day, she'd been calculating her exit strategy. The photograph served as a reminder that appearance and reality don't always match, that some people are capable of sustained deception that can fool even those closest to them. It helped me appreciate the authentic love I'd found with Sarah and our children. Our family grew stronger every year, built on a foundation of honesty that Lisa's betrayal had taught me to value. We argued sometimes, faced challenges and stress like any family, but we never lied to each other about important things. That was Lisa's unintended gift to me, teaching me the difference between performed love and genuine love, between manipulation and authentic intimacy, between someone who saw me as a victim and someone who saw me as a partner. She'd intended to disappear with my money and leave me devastated. Instead, she'd taught me lessons about trust and authenticity that had made me a better husband, father, and human being. The woman who'd faked her death to escape consequences had ensured that the consequences would follow her for the rest of her life. She'd traded a few years of freedom for decades of imprisonment and convinced herself she'd made a smart choice. Lisa had been wrong about everything that mattered. Love wasn't about control or exploitation. Family wasn't about what you could take from people. Freedom wasn't about escaping responsibility for your actions. She'd learned those lessons too late to matter, in a prison cell where she'd spend the rest of her days. But her victims had learned them too, and used that knowledge to build better lives than they'd ever imagined possible. That was the real ending to our story. Not her punishment, but our recovery. Not her destruction, but our growth. Not the justice she'd received, but the love we'd created from the ashes of her betrayal. Some people fake their death to escape their problems. Lisa had faked her death and created problems that would imprison her forever, while freeing her victims to build authentic lives. The truth had won, as it always does eventually. It just took time to catch up with all the lies.